The amendment as proposed by Senator Dana needs to be seconded.
Madam President, I second the motion.
Did someone second the Honorable Minister's amendment? That is Senator Randall Mitchell. I'm trying to recall.
Because that is by the government, it did not need to be seconded.
Okay. Thank you.
The amendment to the motion has been seconded by Senator Richards. Honourable Senators, the question is that the motion be amended as proposed by Senator Dana by deleting the resolution of the motion and replacing it with the following. Be it resolved that this Senate call on the government to table in Parliament within 6 months a policy framework that will guide key stakeholders, including MSMEs, the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, and commercial banks, on how the government intends to navigate the tightness in the foreign exchange market. Those in favour say aye. Those against say no.
Dr. Brown?
No.
Mrs. Gopi-Schoon?
No.
Mr. Sinanan?
No.
Mr. Hussain?
No.
Ms. West? No. Mr. Mitchell? No. Dr. Ibrahim? Mr. De Freitas?
No.
Mrs. Sagram Singh Suklal? No. Mr. Singh? No. Mrs. Lizam Ali Singh? No. Mr. Hislop?
No.
Mr. Boris?
No.
Mr. Seals?
No.
Mr. Young? No. Mr. Mark?
Yes.
Ms. John?
Yes.
Ms. Lakshmi Diyal?
Yes.
Mr. Naked?
Yes.
Mr. Lyder?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Richards?
Yes.
Mr. Vieira?
Yes.
Dr. Diyal Singh?
Yes.
Ms. Dunarain?
Yes.
Ms. Sipasad?
Yes.
Mr. Timal?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson-Aye?
Yes.
Dr. Dylan Remy?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Madam President, the result of the division is as follows. 15 members voted for, 15 members voted against, and no members abstained from voting.
Senators, with the votes being equal as the presiding officer, I am required to vote in accordance with Standing Order 54-2. To exercise a casting vote in this instance, Standing Order 54-2 of the Senate states that the President or any other senator presiding shall not vote unless on any question the votes are equally divided, in which case he shall have and exercise a casting vote, and any reason stated shall be entered in the minutes of the proceedings. Erskine May prescribes the following 3 principles as guides to the presiding officer in the exercise of a casting vote. The presiding officer shall always vote for further discussion where this is possible. Where there is no further discussion is possible, decisions should not be taken except by a majority. A casting vote on an amendment to a bill should leave the bill in its existing form. Giving consideration to these guiding principles, on this matter of the amendment, I vote to maintain the status quo and to leave the motion in its existing form. I therefore vote no. Honourable Senators, I shall now move to the amendment as proposed by the Minister of Tourism, Culture and the Arts. I will now put the question on the proposed amendment. Honourable Senators, the question is that the motion be amended by deleting the resolution of the motion and replacing it with the following. Be it resolved that this Senate call on the government to table in Parliament within 6 months a statement on how the government intends to address the availability of foreign exchange. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no.
No.
I only had those 2, you know. Dr. Brown,
Yes.
Mrs. Gopi Schoon,
Yes.
Mr. Sinanan,
Yes.
Mr. Hussain,
Yes.
Ms. West,
Yes.
Mr. Mitchell,
Oh, yes.
Dr. Ibrahim,
Yes.
Mr. De Freitas,
Yes.
Mrs. Sagram Singh Suklal,
Yes.
Mr. Singh,
Yes.
Mrs. Lizama Lee Singh,
Yes.
Mr. Hislop,
Yes.
Mr. Boris,
Yes.
Mr. Seals,
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Ma,
No.
Miss John,
No.
Miss Lakshmi Dial,
No.
Mr. Nakid,
No.
Mr. Lyder,
No.
Mr. Roberts,
No.
Mr. Richards,
No.
Mr. Vieira,
No.
Dr. Dial Singh,
No.
Ms. Dionarine,
No.
Ms. Sipasad,
No.
Mr. Timal,
No.
Mrs. Thompson Aye,
No.
Dr. Dylan Remy,
No.
Mr. Heath,
No.
Madam President, the result of the division is as follows. 15 members voted for, 15 members voted against, no members abstained from voting.
Honourable Senators, once again, with the vote being equal, as the presiding officer, I am required, in accordance with Standing Order 54-2, to exercise a cast-in vote in this instance, and for the reasons that I articulated earlier, which focus mainly on the fact that a cast-in vote on an amendment to a bill should leave the bill in its existing form, I therefore vote no on this amendment. I am now therefore required to put the motion on as was originally presented. Be it resolved that this Senate call on the government to table in Parliament within 6 months a comprehensive policy framework that will guide key stakeholders, including MSMEs, the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, and commercial banks, on how the government intends to navigate the tightness in the foreign exchange market to overcome downside risks in the medium and long term. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no.
Dr. Brown,
No.
Mrs. Skokie-Skoon,
No.
Mr. Sinanon,
No.
Mr. Hussain.
No.
Mr. Hussain?
No.
Ms. West?
No.
Mr. Mitchell?
No.
Dr. Ibrahim?
No.
Mr. De Freitas?
No.
Mrs. Sagram Singh Suklal? Mr. Singh?
No.
Mrs. Lizam Ali Singh?
No.
Mr. Hislop?
No.
Mr. Boris?
No.
Mr. Seals?
No.
Mr. Young? Mr. Mark?
Yes.
Ms. John?
Yes.
Ms. Lakshmi Diyal?
Yes.
Mr. Naked?
Yes.
Mr. Lyder?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Richards?
Yes.
Mr. Vieira?
Yes.
Dr. Diyal Singh?
Yes.
Ms. Dionarine?
Yes.
Ms. Sipasad?
Yes.
Mr. Timal? Mrs. Thompson-Ai?
Yes.
Dr. Dylan Remy?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Madam President, the result of the division is as follows. 15 members voted for, 15 members voted against, no members abstained from voting.
Honourable members, with the votes being equal, as the presiding officer, I am required, in accordance with Standing Order 54-2, to exercise a cast-in vote in this instance. I have already articulated the principles upon which, the known principles upon which a presiding officer should be guided, and therefore, honourable senators, I vote no, and the motion therefore is not carried. Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move that this Senate do now adjourn to a date to be fixed.
Honourable Senators, before I put the question in the adjournment, leave has been granted for 2 matters to be raised. Senator Richards.
Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to bring this matter in the adjournment, which I identify as the need for the Ministry of Education to take immediate steps to stop teachers employed by the Ministry from providing private extra lessons in contravention of the Ministry's policy. I will add at the onset that my understanding has evolved that there is no such policy in the Ministry, but I think that the motion is no less material because I've made that correction. First of all, let me start by thanking teachers and educators for their ongoing service and sacrifice in educating our nation's children, in particular during the pandemic, while taking care of their own children and families under trying circumstances. This motion on the adjournment does not apply to the majority of teachers in the country, so I don't want that misunderstood, but a small minority, but no less important a motion because of same. The Ministry, as I said, may not actually have a stated policy, but I think that maybe one should be considered. Many parents have reached out to me over many months about this situation. May I put on the record, I do not think the overall principle of extra lessons is flawed, but certainly some teachers offering extra lessons, particularly to their own students in the class to which they are assigned, is fraught with ethical challenges. And some people may consider it actually wrong. Madam President, may I, with your leave, put on the record 2 correspondences that I received from parents in this regard in terms of what they've been going through with this particular situation. One is from a concerned parent who did not want to be identified because she feared that it may have negative repercussions for her child. And I'm quoting from this first correspondence. I'd like to bring to your attention a situation which has me greatly disturbed. I'm a single mother of 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. The ages are 5, 8, and 14. I've continued to try to provide an education for my children, but I've encountered a challenge. My 14-year-old son is in Form 4 and attends a school in Port of Spain. He's been in lessons since he was in Form 2 because the teachers were not, were not completing the syllabus and he was falling behind. At the start it was fine, but now I can calculate 20% of my salary as going toward lessons and one, including himself and one of his sisters. I was very distressed when I spoke to one of his teachers who offered to give him extra lessons. I had to refuse because I simply could not afford to do so and could not afford another class of extra lessons for him. He said the teacher started ignoring him in class, and when I again inquired, she said, quote, "Well, I offer you lessons for him and you said no, so that is now not my problem," end quote. I got very upset and reported it to the principal, who said he could do nothing. I have not put my name because I fear I do not want my son to be victimized. Something needs to be done because poor people have enough on their plates. I do not know what can be done at this state because my son is writing exams soon and I'm worried because he's falling behind. Please help. The next correspondence came via WhatsApp, and I got many WhatsApp messages over several months about this. I know it can be quite challenging, good morning, sorry, quote, "I know it can be quite challenging to deal with a classroom of 30 or 40 students, but some teachers need to take their job as an educator more seriously. A Form 5 student who attends a prestigious school from my lessons class, and this is from a lessons teacher who is retired, complained about the teacher not explaining the topics in the mathematics syllabus properly and giving them a very difficult end-of-term exam. The teacher, which also gives no homework, further reinforces what has been taught in class. When the teacher gives a difficult exam without explaining the mathematical principles properly and not giving homework that is corrected afterward, it will undermine the confidence of the child who is to write CSEC exam in a few weeks. I try not to assume, but it seems there are teachers in our schools who focus more on teaching their private lessons than putting in the proper effort to teach the students they've been assigned by the Ministry of Education to teach. Disclaimer, this post is not meant to target any individuals. It's just a reminder of teachers who are guilty of the above to improve their children's sake. And this, I add, is a minority of teachers. Madam President, as I said before, this is not about the principle of extra lessons, because many teachers give their all as assigned by the principal and by the Ministry of Education. This is about a minority of teachers who are offering lessons, and in some cases, the parents feel that they are at a disadvantage if they don't option the lessons as offered by the teacher. And I think, as I said before, if there is no policy regarding this, one may be considered to try to curtail this because it's putting stress on many families in Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you. Mr. Vice President, sorry.
Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. And I thank the member for the motion. I am grateful that the member has corrected himself in respect of bringing the motion speaking about a policy that does not exist at the Ministry of Education. And this policy does not exist, and of course that policy is restricting teachers from providing private extra lessons. I think the motion has come from a good place, and it's a place of considering equity in the delivery of quality education to our students. Having been a teacher myself, I can indicate, Mr. Vice President, that I have taught with teachers who were very conscientious, the majority of them, and like anywhere else, the teaching service would have members that may not be giving a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. That is not something that is unique to the teaching service. And when that happens, it is very distressing to parents as well as students, because a teacher is a very important and plays a very important role in the development of a child. So I believe the motion, though incorrect, would have come from a good place, a place of concern for our nation's children. And if nothing else, we can use it to bring awareness to our population of the fact that there are many hardworking teachers. I joined with the Senator in indicating that we are very proud of the teachers that would have given human service in these very challenging times and continue to do so now. But we also draw attention to the fact that there are members of the teaching service who, like in any other place of employment, can and must do better. And this is something, and I take that from the member's motion, it is something that must be addressed and in the best way possible through the provisions of the ministry to provide support for teachers. Support in terms of professional development, support in terms of monitoring what is happening at a school, and providing the principals and the teacher with the required information that will allow them to do their job in a more professional way. Support at the level of clinical supervision, not necessarily in a pejorative way, but in a way that gives teachers support in implementation. We've had discussions with our teachers and our stakeholders, and one of the things that have come up is the issue of teacher mentoring, helping teachers to implement what they have learned in professional development sessions in the classroom setting. Because it's one thing to learn it and another thing to implement it. So this is something that we can take from this, and from the Ministry of Education side, that certainly is a focus to make clinical supervision more of a mentoring process where we can help our teachers to perform better and provide support where that is required, if that may be the issue. That's not the issue in all cases, as we well know. But that is where the supervision aspect needs to come into play to identify teachers who simply are not giving the students their fair due. So, Mr. Vice President, we take that from the motion, and that is the way forward for the Ministry of Education in terms of providing more support to our teachers in implementation of what they learn, professional development, support for implementation, and to ramp up the supervision so that there's a clear way to identify teachers who are not doing as they should for the students of the nation. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Eid Mubarak.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, on Tuesday, April the 19th, the government, without any meaningful consultation, decided to unilaterally impose its fifth brutal price hike on the population through increases in super gasoline, diesel, and premium. This was the fifth increase in 7 years. Not only did the price of premium and super gasoline increase by $1 to $6.75 and $5.97 per liter respectively, but so too did the price of diesel, rose by 50 cents per liter to some $3.91. Mr. Vice President, kerosene has also been increased from $1.50 per liter to $3.50 per liter, an increase of $2, an increase by $2. These insensitive and irresponsible increases at the pump will lead to catastrophic and explosive repercussions and consequences for every man, woman, and child. In whose interest is the government effecting these decisions? Certainly not in the interest of the poor, the marginalized, and the vulnerable of our nation, not the working class and the ordinary people. Fuel, like foreign exchange, Mr. Vice President, constitutes the lifeblood of our nation's transportation network, which involves the transportation of all goods and services. Quite apart from higher taxi fares that the members of the traveling public will be called upon to pay, there will be astronomical increases in every possible good and or service. Even the fisher folk will be demanding higher prices for their products. The price of even airfares may find itself on the increase in the not too distant future. Mr. Vice President, this PNM government prefer to subsidize foreigners than their own citizens. This government is yet to explain why a shipment of some 150,000 barrels of refined oil, fuel, products were brought into this country at a price of US $39.87 per barrel and sold to some company called ES Euro Shipping Company at US $38.25. The government needs to explain this development to the nation of this country, to the people of this country. Mr. Vice President, the government needs to explain why they are importing 2.4 billion liters of refined fuel annually, whilst exporting, Mr. Vice President, 1.15 billion liters. To whom are these products being exported to, and at what price? These are real issues confronting our society and cry out for attention. Mr. Vice President, let me say that the United National Congress, as part of the partnership government, never put their hands into the pockets of the poor man in defending the interests of the people of our country. The People's Partnership provided subsidies amounting to close to $20 billion over the period 2011 to 2015. And never once, Mr. Vice President, never once raised the price of super gasoline or diesel. We inherited in 2010 a price of $2.70 per liter for super gasoline and $1.50 per liter for diesel. Those prices were kept by this government of the PP, led by the Honorable Kamala Prasad Bisesa, for over 5 years. But this was a caring government, a sensitive government, a responsible government, sharing the wealth of our nation, oil and gas, with the people, and shielding these people of our nation from the negative impact of higher gas and oil prices. Mr. Vice President, not so with this big shot PNM government. Since assuming office in 2015, this government has increased the price of super gasoline and diesel not once, not twice, but 5 times in 7 years. Mr. Vice President, picking the pocket of the poor, the needy, the marginalized, and the vulnerable. We say enough is enough. This rich man government increased the price of diesel from $1.50 per liter to $1.72 to $1.98 to $2.30 to $3.41 to $3.91. 5 times. This is the legacy of this administration. They provided fuel subsidies amounting to $2.1 billion over the last 7 years, or the last 5.5 years, if I may say. Mr. Vice President, as it relates to super gasoline, this is how this PNM government assaulted the poor in this country when they came to power in 2015. They met it at $2.70 per liter. They increased it to $3.11 per liter, then to
Senator Mark, you have 1 minute.
$3.58 per liter, then to $3.97 per liter, then to $4.97, and now $5.97. Mr. Vice President, we call on the government to review its decision. We call on the government to rescind its decision. We call on the government to do like the Europeans and the G20, subsidize. Do like Guyana, subsidize. Do like New Zealand, subsidize. Do like all those other countries that are seeking to help the poor, the marginalized, and the vulnerable, and not to put the kind of pressure that they are putting on the poor, the vulnerable, the weak, and the marginalized. And that is why we have brought this motion today, Mr. Vice President, to call on the government to review this decision it has taken to remove, Mr. Vice President, right, the subsidies on these basic products, that is diesel and super unleaded in particular. That is why we have brought this motion and we are calling for action. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for allowing me an opportunity to speak on this important matter and to also dispel some of the misinformation that has been coming from the other side. I had to chuckle to myself for a minute when Senator Mark said that the former People's Partnership government never put their hands in the pockets of the poor people. I guess SIS and Lifesport was just a figment of our imagination. But firstly, subsidies are inherently economically inefficient and unsustainable, and always come at a high opportunity cost. Subsidies are generally paid for with taxpayer dollars and can therefore lead to higher taxes, overconsumption, and supply shortages. Mr. Vice President, I would like to remind the population that it is the overdependence on state-sponsored subsidies that played a major role in the collapse of the Venezuelan government and economy. Also, even with the partial removal of the fuel subsidy, Trinidad and Tobago will still have the lowest fuel prices in CARICOM and one of the lowest in the hemisphere, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, there are those who would like to compare the cost of living in CARICOM countries in an attempt to somehow justify the retention of a fuel subsidy. But, Mr. Vice President, there's no comparison. How do you compare an economy where almost everything is subsidized by the state with taxpayer dollars to economies where very little is subsidized? In Trinidad and Tobago, we enjoy subsidized fuel, water, electricity, medicine, housing loans, education, travel, and the list goes on and on and on. I remind the population that because you are receiving something for free does not mean that it is not being paid for. It is just not being paid for by you. Contrary to what is being peddled by those on the other side, this reduction in the fuel subsidy is not meant to be punitive, but is more about shared responsibility. Mr. Vice President, Trinidad and Tobago has just weathered one of the sharpest economic downturns in the history of the world. That did not come without a price. Tough decisions and sacrifices have to be made. As I have publicly stated in the past, being the Minister of Finance is not a popularity contest, and sometimes the most effective economic medicine comes with a bitter taste. With that being said, I would like to remind the population that everything we do is in your best interest and designed to secure yours and your family's future. Your government empathizes with the challenges that we all now face and promise to stand with you as we chart a course out of these rough waters, churned by a pandemic and other geopolitical issues. The taxpayer dollars that would have been spent on a woefully inefficient and unsustainable fuel subsidy can now be spent in a more effective manner by strengthening our social safety net, meaning food cards, grants, unemployment benefits, public transportation, and other measures which are designed to protect the poorest amongst us. Additional funding can now be directed towards healthcare, education, small business loans, and other measures designed to get our country back on its feet again. Mr. Vice President, we have to encourage a basic understanding of how this fuel subsidy works. The most central tenet being that fuel is made from oil. And when oil prices go up, fuel prices will invariably follow. Due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which officially began on the 24th of February 2022, and the subsequent sanctions placed on Russia, recent oil prices have skyrocketed to near record levels. Keep in mind that Russia normally produces 11% of the world's oil production. Due to this major factor and other economic and environmental factors, Brent oil prices averaged $97 US per barrel in February 2022 and $106 US per barrel in March of 2022, an increase of over 60% of the price of oil at the end of December 2021. At the same time, domestic oil and gas production levels, although increasing, are somewhat below levels estimated by the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries in September 2021 for the calculation of revenue from petroleum in the 2022 budget. Therefore, any expected increases in revenue are being offset by shortfalls in oil and gas production. Unfortunately, one of the adverse effects of the current low levels of oil production and high oil prices is an increase in fuel subsidy, which must be paid out of tax revenue and not out of Petrotrin's profits, as I've heard members on the other side attempting to mislead and misinform the population. Mr. Vice President, it has never been the case that Petrotrin paid for the fuel subsidy. Even when Petrotrin was profitable, the fuel subsidy was paid for by taxpayers. And certainly, while it had been losing billions of dollars per annum, in its last few years of operations, Petrotrin did not finance the fuel subsidy in any way. Today, Petrotrin has been replaced with Parliamentary Fuel Trading, which is vastly more profitable than Petrotrin, and the subsidy is still being paid for with taxpayer funds. The fuel subsidy has absolutely nothing to do with Petrotrin. That is simply misinformation. It should be noted, Mr. Vice President, that the fuel subsidy presents no motivation for the population to conserve its consumption of fossil-based fuels. In 2019, motorists consumed in excess of 1 billion liters of fuel, and even more in prior years. In 2020 and 2021, upon the arrival of the COVID virus, consumption dropped to 950 million liters. However, as the economy reopens, consumption is again expected to rise above 1 billion liters per year. Accordingly, the estimated fuel subsidy liability to taxpayers will be between $922 million and $1.94 billion.
Members, I just would like to remind the standing order for crosstalk, whilst especially when a contribution is being made.
With an oil price ranging from $80 US to $100 US per barrel. Part of this subsidy will be offset by the application of the petroleum production levy paid by the producers of oil in Trinidad and Tobago. This is law under the Petroleum Production and Subsidy Act of 1974. The proposed liberalization of fuel prices at the pump had been scheduled to commence in February of 2022, but due to an unexpected vault in oil prices, this has been delayed. It is estimated that this sharing of responsibility will save taxpayers approximately $840 million in fuel subsidy in 2022 alone. And Trinidad and Tobago will remain with the lowest fuel prices in the region and one of the lowest in the hemisphere. Mr. Vice President, the government empathizes with the people of Trinidad and Tobago as we work together to get our country back on its feet again after enduring one of the sharpest economic downturns in recorded history. We are in this together as we share the responsibility of taking Trinidad and Tobago into a brighter future. Thank you.
Honorable Senators, before I put the question I now invite senators bringing greetings on the occasion of Eid al-Fitr, which is to be observed on Monday, May the 2nd, 2022. Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, all praise and gratitude are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who, through His infinite mercy and grace, has blessed us with the opportunity to witness yet another holy month of Ramadan. Mr. Vice President, thank you for granting me the opportunity to bring Eid al-Fitr greetings in this honorable chamber to the Islamic community both at home and abroad, and to all citizens of our beloved country. With the new moon in sight, we will bid farewell to yet another holy month of Ramadan. For Muslims in Trinidad and Tobago, and across the world, this most sacred period has been a time of spiritual reflection and renewal, increased devotion and worship, recommitment to values of gratitude, charity, and compassion. During this time, we are encouraged to focus not only on the outward actions, but rather place greater emphasis on our inner thoughts. drawing us closer to the Almighty. Ramadan is the 9th month of the Muslim lunar calendar, where Muslims fast from dusk to dawn, abstaining from eating, drinking, and immoral acts. Throughout the holy month, Muslims partake in the acts of worship, such as prayer, reading the Quran, and giving charity, and standing in the night for the Tarawih prayer. Preceding the month of Ramadan, we observe the month of Shaban, in which we prepare for the month-long fast. We enter into the holy month of Ramadan with great joy and fulfillment during this month. The blessings of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has magnified 70-fold. With the further ease in restrictions, this year's Eid celebrations will be one of great excitement and joy across the Muslim community. Through the novel coronavirus, COVID-19 is still present in our beautiful nation. We are grateful that this year many Muslims, both at home and across the world, will be able to return to their places of worship and join with their brothers and sisters in Islam in this sacred period of fasting and prayer. The Holy Quran, which was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, by Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in chapter 94:5, states, "So surely with hardship comes ease. As Muslims, we must be patient and understanding, knowing that the Almighty is in control and whatever difficulties we may be facing will not last forever. We must have faith and seek His guidance at all times." As we grow closer to the end of the holy month of Ramadan, the celebration of Eid al-Fitr, which literally translates to the festival of breaking of the fast, let us reform our faith, shape our characters, and draw us closely to Almighty Allah. In preparation to celebrate Eid al-Fitr, I want to encourage my fellow Muslims to reach out to persons in your communities who may be facing difficult times as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Give selflessly and assist those less fortunate, not just at this time of the year, but as a part of a devout and complete Islamic way of life. I also urge my brothers and sisters in Islam to continue to practice kindness, patience, and generosity for the rest of the year. And let us teach our children to exercise the teachings of Almighty Allah in their daily lives. Let us have faith and remain to do good and be our brother's keeper. I pray that Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue guidance and protection upon our government and all our citizens of our beloved twin island paradise of Trinidad and Tobago. May Allah continue to bless us all with good health, long life, and iman, and seek His reward through good deeds. May He accept our fast and ibadah and grant us ease in all our difficulties. May Allah continue to bless us and guide us. Ameen.
Senator Nakid.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, ali taibin at-ta'rin wa shabil muntajabin. In the name of Almighty God, most gracious, especially merciful, peace and blessings upon our Prophet Muhammad and his noble family and his elected companions. Mr. Vice President, tasked with the honor by our political leader, Kamla Prasad Bisesa, of conveying greetings to the nation on the advent of Eid al-Fitr, I was torn between sending the typical Eid greetings with lots of flowery language poetic prose. And there's a lot of that, especially in the English translation from the Arabic. I can wax poetically of how immense our loss, as my colleague previously stated, as this blessed month comes to an end. The month where every breath we take, every prayer that we stand and make is given, rewards and blessings that our human minds could never fathom. The month where every act of charity is counted in multiples, and our strident search for the Laylatul Qadr, the blessed night which is better than 1,000 months, where all matters are arranged, becomes an imminent reality. I can address the coming together of the believers in worship, their hearts open, compassion stretched, eyes weary in all-night prayer and devotion, hearts and souls awash in serenity and tranquility. I can do all that. Or I can make mention of the Almighty God's final prophet, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, whose saying encompasses all what Ramadan really means. And he said, Almighty God, subhanahu wa ta'ala, curses the believer who in this month of Ramadan goes to sleep, stomach satisfied, having eaten a hearty meal, but his neighbor remains hungry. And this, Mr. Vice President, is the true meaning of the month of Ramadan. In other words, what the Prophet said is that we can pray all night, supplication all day, charity, but if we are not mindful of the plight of our neighbor, we are hypocrites, essentially. And this from our Prophet. So the month of Ramadan is not one for hypocritical piety. It's not one for mere visceral action. It's one where the profound meaning of Ramadan is to find virtue that takes us beyond the month of Ramadan and throughout all our lives. So in this month of Ramadan, we practice patience. Not the patience of waiting to eat and drink after 12 plus hours. That is visceral patience. We practice the patience of watching on television as our brothers and sisters in Islam were beaten, humiliated in Islam's second holiest site at Al-Aqsa Mosque. We watch in patience restrained anger. That's what that patience entails. Restrain anger. Prayers to the Almighty to rectify that situation, and even our words and deeds to rectify such a situation. And then we looked on in horror as that what happened in Al-Aqsa Mosque was translated here in Diego Martin, where our places of worship were desecrated by members of the national security apparatus. And we wonder, is that a result of who we have invited here in Trinidad and Tobago? We believers, even those who could afford the ever-rising food prices, were bound by the disciplines of this blessed month to suffice with one meal per day. And if practiced as our Prophet did, that meal would be also a modest one. So we were guided to empathy, to empathize with so many of our citizens in this time who the reality for them all year long is that one meal per day. To watch as their children are content or have to be content with food insecurity and not enough nutritious meals. Our struggle in this blessed month was not one of food and drink, staying up in the night to pray and supplicate. Our struggle, as our beloved Prophet indicated, is to account for our less fortunate, whatever the circumstances may be. Our struggle is to ensure that this country, this government, does not place 650 citizens of our country in a car park under inhumane conditions and call it a displacement shelter. Our struggle is to ensure that our youth from poor, disadvantaged communities get the opportunities to move forward towards a productive life before you have to deal with them before they enter the penal system. That is our struggle. And if poetic justice was a thing.
Senator Nakid, as your Muslim brother, I would say that I don't have to speak on the angle that you're going down, but for you have received divine intervention by you leaving your ringtone on and hearing the adhan.
It's not a ringtone, brother. It's a notification of the adhan.
Time to pray. The fact is that you have left your volume on and it has indicated for you time to pray. I would go so far to say it was an intervention where the chair wasn't necessarily have to stand up and say to keep your address as an Eid greeting on behalf of your party as you've been invited to, and stay away from the matters of the press and be guided accordingly.
I disagree completely. As I pointed out, our Prophet was about the equity and justice even in the month of Ramadan. But I continue. So, Mr. Vice President, although we yearn for the blessings and mercies this month afford us, and we will look forward to the coming of the next month of Ramadan with the hope and love that a young bride awaits her husband sent off to war, we recognize the visceral and the latent meaning of this most blessed of months. And we pray that Almighty God lifts the veil from our eyes, our hearts, and blesses us with the courage to take the virtues acquired in this month into every other month of our lives. And I send peace and blessings to all our citizens. On behalf of our honorable political leader, Kamala Prasad Bisasa, and all of the UNC, and all of my Muslim brothers and sisters throughout the region, and indeed throughout the world. As we say in the Islamic greeting, Eid Mubarak, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Mr. Vice.
Senator Timan.
Mr. Vice President, it is indeed an honor and privilege on behalf of the independent senators to bring greetings to the Muslim community and the nation of Trinidad and Tobago on this auspicious occasion of Eid ul-Fitr 2022. Ramadan is the holiest month in the year in Islam. And for Muslims, it is a time for spiritual reflection and growth. It is a time to help those in need and a time to spend with loved ones and family. It is indeed a time when Muslims around the world fast during the daylight hours for the whole month of Ramadan. Thus, for Muslims, Ramadan is an opportunity to practice self-discipline, self-control, sacrifice, and empathy for those who are less fortunate, thus encouraging actions of generosity and compulsory charity or zakat, which is one of the pillars of Islam. Many persons forget that God is the source of all sustenance. True thanksgiving is to know that all sustenance comes directly from God, to acknowledge its value, and to appreciate our need and dependence on that sustenance. A fasting person physically feels the value of and their need for basic sustenance when they experience the pangs of hunger and thirst. And since a believer fasts for the sake of God, they acknowledge that the sustenance which may be taken for granted actually comes from God. Therefore, fasting in the Islamic tradition is the best way to show a true and sincere thanksgiving. Ramadan culminates in the celebration of Eid al-Fitr, and as our Muslim brothers and sisters gather in their mosques and homes to observe this joyous event, may we be always reminded of the peace, love, and equality which are the inherent features of Islamic teachings. May Almighty Allah shower His choicest blessings upon the Muslim community and upon all of us citizens of Trinidad and Tobago on this auspicious occasion of Eid al-Fitr. Eid Mubarak.
Honorable Senators, it is my privilege to join with those who have spoken before me in the bringing to the members of the Muslim community and faith and the wider society the greetings of Eid al-Fitr. Without an element of self-denial and asceticism, no religion, therefore no human culture is possible. One must withdraw occasionally from the full life of the senses, even in order to be able to enjoy the fruit of sensual perception. As the Taoist saying goes and affirms, it is the empty space of the wheel that makes the wheel. One such practice of restraint is fasting, as practiced in Islam, as obligatory for the month of Ramadan and recommended for other periods of the year. Fasting during this month possesses, of course, many social and external and eternal benefits. The individual, and through him, the Islamic community, is renovated through this rite and reminded of its moral and spiritual obligations and goals. That is why the arrival of the blessed month is greeted with joy, for in it the doors of heaven are open further for the faithful, and the divine compassion descends upon those who seek it. To have completed the fast of Ramadan is to have undergone a rejuvenation and rebirth which prepares each Muslim to face another year with determination to live and act according to the divine will. The fast also bestows a spiritual perfume upon the human soul, whose fragrance can be perceived long after the period of abstinence has come to an end. It provides for the soul a source of energy upon which it feeds throughout the year. The holy month has therefore been called the Blessed, Mubarak, one of which the grace or barakah of God flows upon the Islamic community and rejuvenates its deepest sources of life and action. I personally admonish those who have joined me on this fast in any way, not to be selfish with the benefits, but to share the lessons to all our cultures, creeds, and races of this great nation. So when we all say Eid Mubarak, we pass on not only the joy, but the lessons. Therefore, in the spirit of grace and blessings, please allow me, on behalf of the President of the Senate, the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, myself and my family, to wish our Muslim brothers and sisters, and by extension, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, Eid Mubarak. Honorable Senators, the question is that the Senate do now adjourn to a date to be fixed. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. The Senate now stands adjourned to a date to be fixed.